All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is Lindsay Brown from Beyond Clean, and I want to just say thank you so much for choosing to kick off your weekend with us and all of our awesome speakers today. You are 100% making our day, and for that, we thank you. I'd also like to thank our event sponsor today, Censis Technologies, for helping make this educational event possible. We have another panel discussion for you all today. The panel discussion this morning was just so fun to tune into and learn from. All of the presenters today have just been fantastic. And so the reason I love panel discussions so much is we just get such a wide range of perspectives in one presentation. I think that's powerful, I think it's impactful, and I think it's really meaningful as well. And hopefully you're finding the same. Hank Balch is joining us again to guide this next conversation. If you don't know Hank, I invite you to learn more. He's a cool dude. He's a well-known industry writer, blogger, social media connoisseur, founder and president of Beyond Clean. And joining him for this panel discussion is Damon Miles, sterile processing educator at Stanford Children's Health. He's an educator on a mission to equip sterile processing professionals with the tools and knowledge needed to help them fight dirty. Also joining this discussion is Tanya, Cambise, clinical education specialist for the sterile processing department at Presbyterian Healthcare Services. Her role involves training SPD techs throughout the health system and educating them on the importance of reprocessing and sterility. The third person joining Hank for this discussion is Angela Benson. Angela is a sterile processing education specialist at UW Health. She's passionate about sterile processing education and staying up on the latest industry standards and guidelines. She's also a proud member of the Beyond Clean Advisory Group. How can tracking systems equip departments to better educate your frontline team members? And what are the current challenges and barriers facing departments when it comes to utilizing these technologies to onboard, to train, and to document competencies? Get ready to discover the real-life intersection of technology and education in our departments. Is tracking system technology really a time saver for our education records? Well, great question, and we are about to find out. I'll turn it over to Hank and the team.
What's up, Total Tracking 2022? We're excited for this session entitled The School of Scanning. My name is Hank Balch, and let's meet our panelists for this discussion. We're going to talk about the crossover with education and our tracking systems and educators in our tracking system. So let's go around the horn here. Kick us off, Angela, and tell us who you are, where you're from, and I don't know, maybe why you wanted to be a sterile processing educator.
I am Angela Benson. I am the sterile processing education specialist in UW Health, Madison, Wisconsin. I've been doing the educator role for 3 years, been in sterile processing collective 13 years. I actually didn't really want to be the educator.
Oh, man. Okay.
I did and I didn't. When I started my role at the hospital as a technician back into the field, I've been out of it for about 11 years. I started the technician level, moved to Tech 2, went on to be a senior. Did a lot of training for the second shift that I worked on, and just kind of was doing somewhat of the role without being in the role, since we did have an educator at the time. When he left his position, there was an opportunity. I was a little shy, nervous to do it, and then he came back into his role for a few months, and then actually left again. And I think in that time period, I was able to get a little more confidence in it, and my manager encouraged me to go for the role. And as I said, I kind of realized that I'd already was doing the steps in it, but without really the title and the hours and then everything else that does come with it besides, just not having the actual responsibility put on you. So, and I haven't looked back since, and it's been very rewarding and a great experience for myself in learning as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, looking forward to jumping into all those things that you've learned over the next hour. Let's go to Damon next. Who are you, Damon? Where you're from, and why did you want to become a sterile processing educator?
Thanks, Hank. This is Damon Miles here from Palo Alto, California. I'm currently the Sterile Processing Department educator at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital, also known as Stanford Children's. Been a reprocessing professional since 2015. I did take a little hiatus for 2.5 years as a medical device sales rep. And
a sales guy. Boo.
Yes.
No. Just kidding.
And, I stayed plugged into the reprocessing community during my time as a sales rep, and COVID was tough on my family. We decided to relocate to California, where my significant other and I are both from originally, and where our families are. And it was just kind of the perfect timing to get back into reprocessing at my dream job, my dream facility at Stanford Children's. I'm just excited to have this conversation today and share what I've learned.
Great. Awesome. Welcome to the panel. And Tanya, wrap us up here with the intro section. Who are you, where are you from, and why did you become a sterile processing educator?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Hank. My name is Tanya Cambise. I am the clinical education specialist for sterile processing, and I actually work for Presbyterian Health Systems within New Mexico. So I'm based out of Albuquerque, and I've actually been in sterile processing for 9 years, but have been the educator a little over, I think it's 2.5 years now, close to that. And I actually am the first sterile processing educator for the system. So the role was created kind of at a good time. I had moved up in the department. I had been a tech. I had been the supervisor and then eventually the manager. And this role opened up, and it gives me the ability to really help standardize our processes across the state. So it's a different, unique way of educating, since I do educate for 7 different hospitals within our group. So yeah, I mean, that's just kind of worked out perfectly for me. Timing was great, and I love it.
Beautiful. Well, for your day job, you educate 7 different facilities. Right now, this panel is going to be educating probably a couple hundred different facilities across the U.S. Once we cut down into the demographics. And that's great because, as I said at the intro to the show, this is really a tie-in. Like, this panel discussion is a tie-in between 2 things. It's the role of the educator, if you're lucky enough or blessed enough to have an educator at all, or like Angela said, some of us are out there and our department doesn't technically have an educator, but we have different people kind of doing some of these duties, which is great. You got to do what you got to do. I never, in any of my departments, actually had an educator. We always were doing double duty. It was the manager doing some of it, the quality assurance tech doing some of it, the instrument coordinator doing some of it, and all our powers combined, we got the education done. But it's that piece plus the interfacing or intersection of these high-tech tracking systems that many of our departments have nowadays. And so I want to start from that technician perspective, as each of y'all voiced. That's what your job entails, is educating the front line. It's the technicians. It's the folks out there doing the job, getting dirty or fighting dirty, as we like to say, beyond clean. So I want you to think back about your first memories of getting introduced as a new technician to your tracking system as a part of that orientation process. What was that experience like? And, looking back from the eyes of an educator now, does anything stick out in your memory of that kind of first interaction or first sight of this instrument tracking system that you'd have to use? And anybody can jump in here.
Well, we actually started, when I got back in the industry, it was a different tracking system that we had than we do now. That was in 2015. And looking back at that, actually, I said this several times that I feel like we didn't utilize it the best way we could have when we had it. And then I don't know where the decision was to go with the system we had that we started in 2017. But a lot of it, which is great from what I'd been doing, sterile processing a long time back, where it was all manual. You're handwriting your tape, what the instrument set is. You're going by one piece of paper, your count sheet, where this system was a, electronical based count sheet, and you're able to create your sterilizer loads and make records and things like that. But what it had been missing, I believe, was that barcoded system, in the sense of being able to type in and locate your set as to where the last scan was. So for training basis, it was just, you're introduced into your department and it's just part of the checklist that you're being shown, a computer, click this, do that. So same with the newer system that we'd gotten, we actually had staff from the system come in and do hands-on training because it was such a big overall, and also incorporated the OR into the scanning portion of it. So it was an overall just, I guess, an orientation based off of that. And then from there, as new employees came in, it was kind of a good thing too, if they've never done sterile processing, because they had no idea what it used to be or what it could have been. And so it was just computer to them. Others can come in with experience in the past, like I said, which we're used to, and maybe some cases where it's all manual. That is the learning curve, definitely. But they're not difficult in a sense. It's just kind of.
Oh, okay. Let's follow up on that piece here, because you allude to something as I think you said it like it's just a computer, right? And I would say too that there's a smaller number of professionals each year that even remember what life was like without a tracking system. You're right. Like I started in 2009, and my entire career has been with a tracking system, different tracking systems, but I've always been in an department and had a tracking system. So I know no different. Now, Tanya, in your experience, looking back, I think you said you're in the industry about 9 years or so, right? What was that experience like? Like, did you start in a department that had a tracking system? And if not, when you did start, what was that kind of first thing that came to mind when you're like, I got to use this program to do my job?
Yeah, so I actually have a little bit different experience in that I was actually in the manager role when we started looking at the tracking system, and that was in the last 2.5 years. Okay. So I was actually the manager that at the time chose the tracking system that we're using, and was transitioning into my educator role when we were still implementing. So I had a little bit different experience in that. Prior to this, we had been manual, and most of our other sites, minus the one, is still manual. So it's one of those things where I was there kind of in the beginning, getting it implemented, getting it kind of going with all the data to get it actually built, and then afterwards helping the technicians kind of learn as we went, because I wasn't always involved in every meeting getting it going. And so it was a little bit different experience getting into those 2 weeks that the educators from the tracking system were there, and really getting into the meat of things with the technicians and kind of learning with them, because I didn't have any previous experience with a tracking system. So I have a little bit different kind of twist to this whole education portion of it.
Yeah, that's great. So Damon, it's clear that Angela and Tanya are not scared at all. Their experience is not one of fear and trepidation with these tracking systems. But I actually wrote this question expecting somebody to say, oh yeah, it was overwhelming. And I was just like, lost, vertigo, Was that your experience, or am I completely off base with this?
Well, as a sales rep, I utilize a CRM program.
Oh, man, 3 for 3. You got to be kidding me.
So I was a little bit warmed up to an instrument tracking system, but I came into my role just recently, and, they handed me the keys to the kingdom of my instrument tracking system. But while I was the new guy, they just threw me in the deep end and said, here you go. Go learn it for yourself. Here, they showed me the very basics of it. So I was actually reached out to all of my experienced technicians to say, hey, how are you using this? What does it do for you? That's great. And how can I make it better? But going back to my sales rep experience, I had many years of using a CRM, and I realized, you can only get out what you put in. And so there was a little bit of a cleanup involved, a little spring cleaning, if you will. To kind of get rid of any of the inconsistencies over years and years of having multiple administrators. And now, as me being the main administrator of my instrument tracking system, I can kind of reorganize and tweak it to make it efficient for our department and especially for our technicians.
Well, so that first question, I can tell I'm the only one that's afraid of technology, I guess. If I'm not alone, please put it in the comment section below if you're also afraid of technology at times. But I do want to follow up on this because each of y'all voiced a specific experience of going through that encounter of a new tracking system. Either it's new to you or it's new to your department, bringing it in. What didn't work well about how you experienced or learned those systems for the first time? Because part of the takeaway for this panel discussion is we want to get actionable steps to help educators in particular ease that transition process from nothing to something, or from something to a different something, or just coming in off the street to this new tracking system. So, looking back at your experiences, what didn't work well for you, or what can you look back and say, hey, this actually didn't work well for our staff, the way that we were trying to train or the way that we were trying to orient? Do you want to kick us off first, Damon, maybe?
Yeah, so with my current facility, it was kind of just a learn as you go type situation. We typically start our technicians, whether they're a new student, an extern, a temp, or a new hire. We start them on the clean side of things, doing inspection and assembly, and kind of just start really, really slow, moving some items from one place to another, from the washer to the dryer or to the shelf to the assembly station. Typically starting with peel packs. Being a children's hospital, we have some small sets like myringotomies, tonsils, and adenoid sets, and just doing repetition. And typically after about a week, the technicians were pretty comfortable moving items, doing their typical day-to-day. What didn't work for me was there was no structure. So I try to come in and be as deliberate as possible, have a game plan, schedule out the training time, and do lots of follow-up with my technicians and lots of little quizzes. Hey, how do you do this? How do you move that? What do you do in this certain situation? And I think the training just needs to be a little more prolonged and intentional. The instrument tracking system is really our database, the key of everything we do and all the information we need as leaders. So the more we can put in, have consistency from the technician standpoint and from the leadership standpoint, the better the results are going to be for everybody. In the pre-conference session that aired last night, if you missed it, go back and check it out. I try to make this analogy. It was stretching the metaphor a little bit, I guess, but we referenced the heartbeat of the hospital as sterile processing, and I was referencing the tracking system as like the blood or the pulse or something, that's pushing all the instruments through the process in the way and the direction that they should go, so that's that point about structure, I think that you made, Damon, is interesting, because if you don't have the right training structure and orientation structure to this big, high-powered tracking system, you can miss a gap. And the gap, Tanya, shows up, wouldn't you know, on like nights and weekends when there's no one there to realize, oh yeah, Johnny was never shown how to do that one thing in the tracking system. In your experience, did you see any gaps like that in how you oriented or implemented your tracking system? Is there anything that you kind of learned along that process?
Yes, I think some of the gaps that we had was not everybody having kind of the super user access. So when you talk about weeks, weekends and nights, trays, especially because it was a long implementation. We have a ton of trays. Not everything was barcoded. And so you don't think about these things, but you do need somebody to have that super user access on the weekends so that when those trays come in, they're able to quickly print out the label that they need or to input that instrument set. While there's a hack for our system to be able to put in loaner sets, if they do come in on the weekend, obviously we don't want our vendors to know that, but there's a way that they can kind of hack the system to get those instrument sets in. It's not the exact process we should be doing. So having those users that have that super user access to be able to print labels, to be able to put inventory in was definitely a gap that we saw, especially with our sterile processing techs. And in the beginning, when we were barcoding everything known to man, even with the 2 weeks of, the company being there helping us, we still had a ton of inventory after the fact that we still needed a barcode. So that was definitely something that we had to make sure was in place to not have that gap on those weekends and nights.
So for folks who are not necessarily familiar with the phrase super user, I gathered from what you said, that's someone who has more access than a normal staff member, but not necessarily all the access of like an administrator. So is there anything besides, printing labels and adding trays that you would put underneath that super user category, Tanya?
Within our system, we can also give them access to be able to push out messages. That's something as well, especially when we're trying to communicate different gaps, allowing them to add in messages. Others can view them, but they can't make them themselves. So that is another thing that we looked at. Sometimes it's a matter of being able to print a barcode, for the actual staff, not just for the instruments. So being able to go in and add a user, because we have a fairly large operating room staff. We all want them to scan. Part of that is being able to have that barcode on their badge. So even having that access is something that's important. We have people coming in on all different shifts, so it's important to have that capability to be able to do those specific tasks.
And now, Angela, I want to bring you in on the initial question, but then also if you have any feedback on that super user piece, I want to talk about that some more. But to go back, the initial question was what gap or, challenge looking back on the training or the orientation process for tracking systems, what did you learn out of that process that you would not repeat?
This is going to be kind of a laughable because I feel like I say this a lot, is consistency. Consistency is very key in the sense of trying to, I know when we had, like I said, the staff coming in for the program and showing different ways of how to use it, we found that there were gaps even in that because each one of them have different knowledge for that system and they were showing different people different ways. And for myself, being shown one way and just being used to that, then I pass that along to others, then they have an update that happens, and then it creates one of those ways that is not possible. It creates a glitch in the system. So having that consistency and that communication with your, I guess I can use the super user term, or our seniors and the staff that have that admin access, making sure that we have all of the same knowledge for that too. And being consistent in showing all of the staff members, because as training or different issues come up, everyone has just kind of a little bit different way to show or how to get around that. And some of that feedback as even new staff members are coming in. I was shown 7 different ways to do my printer setup for this system, and it's very confusing because I remember pieces of all of it. I just can't get it done, that kind of thing. So just that consistency. And for our system, we do have the admin access. I guess there's the different levels of manager, or there's even maybe lead technician, different things like that. Report pulling, messages. There is a way around to getting barcodes that everyone can do. I just don't know if everyone knows that. There's definitely things that once you start playing around with the system, you find some loopholes, actually. Things maybe weren't shown by the company, but you found as the user yourself, and knowing when to also give that information as well, because sometimes having too much of that can create too many people doing something that can get, confusing and things like that. But I think we have about 10 people in our department have that access where, yes, there is the weekend gap potentially, or for us, we have the third shift, but one of our super users was on that shift. So trying to think of those things, again, we've been using it for a while now. So we do try to, as Tanya was saying, she's been doing it kind of newer, and she's kind of in that beginning stage of figuring those things out, because you have to have time. It takes a long time to get things barcoded, and you forget about those sets you don't use very often that you have to unwrap and, you know, update stickers, and there's adhesive, and it's a messy process to get everything transitioned over. So
you brought up consistency, which I think everyone on the panel was nodding their heads saying, yeah,
yes.
that's a gap. And I want to go back to the super user piece, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but just kind of poll y'all on the panel. In terms of the person in your department that knows the most about your tracking system, is it, number one, is it expected to be you? And then number two, we got to be a little honest here, is it actually you? So let's go around the horn. Angela, you go first. So is the expectation that you know the most about the tracking system, and do you know the most about the tracking system today?
Is it expected? Well, I just can't help myself. So yeah, probably. And is it? No, I've shared. Okay. I've recently shared. We have a new role in our department. His specialist is his title, and I've had to share. So a lot of the things I self-taught, and I just got really active and into. Again, as the tracking system, that a newer one came in, I was a senior on second shift, so I was going to be the point person anyway to be showing and helping. But I can't help myself. I like to go digging and see different, you know, processes. So is it expected of me? I mean,
yeah,
probably, okay. Yes. There's others, though. Again, there's
and you share.
Shared.
Right. Okay. So, Damon, a question to you.
Is absolutely expected of me.
Okay.
I've been doing a lot of self-teaching, just playing around, clicking around in the system. I made friends with my account manager, and I call my tech support all the time. Shout out to Clifford in Atlanta, Georgia. He's helped me out like 5 times this week.
It's Damon again. What's up, Cliff?
So, you know, I think it's valuable to have whoever your main administrator is to, you know as much as possible, but also to train all of your other leadership as well. Just to touch on a point of consistency that Angela brought up, and having super users or additional people implementing sets that Tanya brought up. I think it's super important to have them all trained the same way, or have them implement and put in, especially new items, the same way. Just speaking from experience, I was going through trying to find a certain set for an eye specialty, and somebody saved it under ophthalmology. So we had kind of 2 different categories that were about the same. Or if, you know, you're looking for a set, there could be maybe a misspelling, an abbreviation, a dash, a hyphen, a period, something that'll throw you off. You'll never find what you need. So I think that consistency needs to go for anybody implementing anything new as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And then Tanya, is it expected that you're the super user, and are you the super user in your system for the tracking system?
So I think it's a little bit of both. I'm going to be a little different, partly because I cover 7 hospitals, and I only have 1 hospital that has a tracking system. So while I am kind of that super user and I do kind of know a lot about it, I'm not the only one, thankfully. The shift coordinator position within our department, the gentleman that is filling that position actually came from another hospital system that used the same tracking system. So it's kind of nice here recently, like he's been making some additions that I didn't know were capable of doing. So we've been kind of collaborating in that sense that we're able to really are just getting, I feel, even though we're like 2+ years into the implementation, we're just now getting into the nitty gritty of like, how can we make this thing work? So, you know, and really sharing that not only with our sterile processing techs, but also our operating room so that they're aware of what it can do too. So I do think it is kind of a partnership because I can't be there all the time. But I do rely on my partner in the department to kind of help with some of those things that he knows about as well.
That piece, I'll call that cross-pollinating, or, cross-pollination, I guess, is an interesting one when you look at, and I'll give a shout out, Damon gave a shout out to Clifford in Georgia. I'm going to give a shout out to our travelers in our department, because there's few better examples of cross-pollinating in our tracking systems than your travelers, because these guys and gals are all over the place. They're seeing all kinds of tracking systems, and oftentimes they're coming away with those little tips and tricks and hacks that we've mentioned that, oh yeah, I saw this at my last contract and I know how to fix that, or I know who you need to call, or I know the process. Now, that cuts both ways because they learn the hacks and they learn the other ways, but it can also convolute the process, because just like Angela said, even if you're in the same tracking system every day, if you go through updates and you remember the old way to do things, now the new way to do things, travelers are like doing that every 13 weeks, and they're constantly having to learn and relearn and like do different processes, and it's hard, so I want to give the travelers some grace out there for doing the best they can in a scenario, but then also to say, if they become a nerd like some of us do in these tracking systems, they become fun, you want to learn as much as you can. I know that's a great, potentially a great resource, to tap into those folks. Moving on here, and again, going back to just the real practical type of resources that we highlighted that we want to provide folks out of this session, we talked about what didn't work. I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about how you approach training and orienting that does work. Like, what are those best practices that you've seen, very specific that a manager or educator, maybe even a technician, could bring back to their educator and say, hey, I heard them say this at that conference. If they do this and it really works, can we try that for the new people, or can we try that with us? Let's start with you, Angela. Any best practices or anything that specifically works well that you'd like to share?
Not anything particular. Like I said, there's a lot of different features you can utilize on the count sheet that we have, like features of showing the items that you're selecting as you go, where you can hide them, what's fulfilled. In some cases, when you're first starting off with the new staff members, it's helpful for them to be able to see what they're selecting off. And then later on, as you feel like they're getting more comfortable with it, then you start, for me, I start introducing the kind of not shortcuts, but little added steps that are helpful, whether it's, we view substitutions, that's kind of a right away thing. So that way they have help as to what they're looking for, because a lot of instrumentation, you have substitutes. There's just really basic things to use. I don't have anything specific, I guess, besides I get a lot of feedback. Can you add this picture in for me? And there's a picture here, that'd be really helpful. Or look at all these pictures here, and why aren't there any on this? And
that's massive. That picture piece is huge for new technicians. So that's a great point.
Also very much a high encourager of also learning what the instrument is as well, besides getting used to those helps, just for the sake of, you won't have a picture in front of you if you were on call by yourself on the weekend and someone's, from the OR asking for something specific. So trying to go back to the basics as well when doing that. But there isn't any one thing that I can think of right this second that's, hey, this is every single time kind of a piece, but just the basics usually on it and not overwhelming them.
So that's important. And I want to ask kind of a poll question here before we move on to Damon and Tanya's best practices. But the poll is, do you allow a select all option on your assembly? I know this is kind of a hot topic out there, but do you let your technician scroll down to the very bottom and say, boom, everything's here? Or do you require individual clicks? Let's start with Tanya first.
We do individual clicks, so no select all.
Okay. And what about you, Damon?
Individual clicks. We want to inspect every instrument. No shortcuts.
Yeah. Okay.
Individual
and
clicks.
Angela? Individual clicks. Okay.
No.
All right. So if you're listening or watching and you allow select all, let us know that you do, and let us know why and how you do it, because it is a debate. And especially as you're looking at it from the perspective of some of these experienced technicians, who hold their integrity and their skill very dear to them. And they say, listen, I know the tray, I know the expectations, I will do it the way it's supposed to be done. I just don't want to have to click 120 boxes to complete this tray. So I applaud y'all for doing the every click, because I think there's a lot of good reasons to do every click, just like David said. Now we have a record. It standardizes that process flow, but I also know there may be some differences of opinion, so we'd love to hear that. All right, so Damon, your best practices, things that you've learned in this orientation onboarding process that you'd like to share to maybe help some folks out?
Well, I think the two most important things are patience and repetition. Instrument tracking systems are complex, and they're computer programs, and everybody learns at a different speed. Maybe somebody younger may or may not pick it up quicker, but I think patience is definitely needed. And then just getting reps under your belt. And that may take, a different amount of time depending on the learner. As far as that goes, we also need competencies, right? So we want to standardize to make sure, just like all of our other equipment, instruments, or processes, we want to make sure our technicians are confident and competent in performing the day-to-day tasks in your instrument tracking system.
Okay, competencies, we have to come back to that. You're adding to my interview outline here. But yeah, that's a very important point there, Damon. Thanks for bringing that up. So Tanya, what else have you learned along the way in this process? Like Angela said, you're in the thick of it still, 2 years in, 2.5 years in. It's really, really fresh. So what are those things that you've seen in that time that has worked well, that you've gotten good positive feedback on from the staff?
So I do know, just like Angela said, there's a lot of different tips for new technicians, like being able to, hide instruments when you're doing your tray, things like that. So those are very basic for us. But I think also really kind of early on, we started discovering just in our documentation that we had gaps, especially around the sterilization. And it's kind of an ongoing thing where it's one field that you think should be documented in a different spot, but it isn't. And it's our chemical indicator lot number. And so that was one of the pieces that we kept missing in our documentation. And so one of the things that we actually ended up doing was the team that I'm part of gives me access to build actual training modules. So we built interactive training modules where they can see videos of the documentation and all the steps, and then actually go in and click on each box and mimic like what you would be doing within the tracking system. And I feel like that's been very helpful. I'm currently working on some right now to deliver to the operating room as well, because there's some tasks that they want to be able to do, but they don't know how. So I think it's one of those things where it's just identifying those gaps. So doing the audits to see where you're having issues, providing the education, and then actually following back up to re-audit to see how that education has gone out. And I do know speaking with each tech individually has been the most helpful. So when you identify something, walking them through and showing them why it's important to document has been very powerful for us as well.
And that goes back to the competency piece that Damon brought up that we'll be talking about here next. So that's a great point. You brought up the integrated training modules, or I forget the word that you use, but are those training like videos that you mentioned, are those in your tracking system, or are you using like an external program to build those to teach your tracking system?
It's actually in an external program, but it's taking like screenshots and making them interactive. So it looks like you're in the tracking system.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, that sounds like a great tool and very practical, because it's hard to teach these kind of things like go here, click here, do this. Like I've seen, and I've probably tried it before, to print out like all the steps, do this like 1 through, 57, like click on this, do this little thing, like you get the little icons, and that's just very difficult to communicate in print.
That is actually what I do a lot.
Okay. Yeah, so
I do a lot. I'm very much
understand.
with snip tools, and I have a lot of cheat sheets, or as I call them, or at-a-glances. So as she was talking about, I was like, oh yeah, I guess I do have a lot of those. The lot indicator, that speaks to me. Yes, we have a little piece of paper printed out, circled, highlighted. Do not forget this. So that's great.
Is it common? So, Damon said that he does this. I'm kind of curious, Angela and Tanya, in approaching your competencies, because obviously competencies are a huge responsibility for educators, and we'll talk a little bit more about specific responsibilities for educators here in a second. But in your competencies, I know there's just so much focus on compliance and quality, like, what is Joint Commission going to ask for in these competencies? And I don't know if they really ask straight up, hey, do your people know how to use your tracking system? But if they do or if they don't ask that, we all agree that our people need to know how to use the tracking system. So apart from the training and the orienting, are you currently building that into like a competency section, or to what's your opinion or process on that? And you can go first, Angela.
Actually, as we're talking about this, I'm already thinking of all the things I want to update on my competencies. Where it really is, some of it is just basic steps of knowing how to log into your computer, knowing how to find Censis, which is our tracking system, and knowing how to then, build separately in the sterilization competency, how to build that load and what the expectations for checking, verifying, things like that. I actually have not had a surveyor specifically ask about a tracking system of how the training has gone. It's usually more of the component of those steps for sterilization and what they're looking for, your cycle printout and your parameters. How do you know those parameters are supposed to be found, things like that. So I'm just now processing through everything that I'd like to probably get into more depth on the competency, because they're not, lengthy enough.
Good. Mission accomplished, right?
Thank you. Yes.
Already got some takeaways.
Yes.
What about you, Tanya? How have you kind of worked out? Because Angela brings up a good point. If you're doing all the training and all the other things that your folks need to be competent on, there's going to be pieces of the tracking system all throughout that, because you can't be compliant in your automated washing if you're not scanning into the washer, right? Is that how you approach the specific training to tracking, or do you do it more along the lines of Damon?
So I think for us, we do have our base competencies, but we haven't completely incorporated the tracking system into those competencies just yet. So it's just kind of an expectation when we're onboarding that we're going through all the steps that need to be there and then following up to make sure that they're happening. But as far as having specific competencies for the tracking system, we don't currently have those. But, like Angela's saying, she's like, I'm thinking about all these things now. I'm like, ooh, maybe we need those too.
Right. So, Damon,
thank you.
I'm going to put you on the spot here as the guy who has thought about and, done some of this. But I'm going to take the pressure off a little bit and say, hey, everybody out there, anybody who's ever been responsible for competencies, raise your hand, has never been completely satisfied with where your competencies are. We're all in this kind of growth process of we want to get better. We want to add more, not necessarily longer competencies, because I don't think anybody wants longer ones. We want, better, concise, and thorough. But all that being said, in how you approach this intersection between tracking system and competencies, like what would you advise or encourage folks who want to do it, how to do it or how to approach it?
Start small. Make it simple at first, organized and consistent. Once you get through your first wave, you can build and reflect and say, hey, do I need to add more? Do I need to take more away? But especially for like the instrument tracking, just break it down by maybe work area or task and just go one bite of the elephant at a time. Start small.
All right. Well, we'll keep that short and succinct too, because I don't want to have it any more complicating notes than that. But I completely agree, and it goes back to the gap piece. And I think all three of y'all brought that up earlier. Of if you're being showed by Susie and Deacon Tam how to do Deacon Tam tracking, and then if you're being trained by are lean in assembly, how to do the tracking in assembly, and they're teaching you different things about the tracking system and different flows. It's a recipe for gaps. So coming into this, standard training competency piece of what is the expectation in this department that everyone is supposed to know about the tracking system. And then from the educator standpoint or the shift leader manager, on an annual basis, you get that opportunity to sit down and say, hey, do you really know this? Show me how you do this and show me that you know this. And then to your point, Damon, continuing to build on top of that from year to year. I think that's a great plan. So we got a little over 15 minutes left. And in the words of Smokey and the Bandit, we got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So let's push into specific responsibilities. I brought this up earlier. I'm really curious to get your insight on what is expected of your role as it pertains to the instrument tracking system. Now, we were just talking about competencies, so clearly competencies are in your purview as educators, but we also asked about the super user earlier, like, is it the expectation that you're the super user? Is it the manager? Is it the instrument coordinator? Is it the database specialist? Like, there's roles out there like that they are specifically the people who are the gurus for the tracking system. But in your day-to-day role as an educator, what do you do in these tracking systems? What do other people do in the tracking systems that impact your role as an educator? And we give a good example of this, like if you have an instrument coordinator and they're adding a tray to the inventory, well, y'all kind of have to talk and say, hey, you added this new robotic tray. What's our plan to educate and tell people that it was added? How are we going to tackle these IFUs? And that obviously impacts your specific responsibilities as an educator. So I kind of want to talk through that a little bit. Let's start with Tanya, if you don't mind. How does your role cross over specifically with tracking, and how do other people impact that?
So we've actually kind of instituted a usually weekly meeting, and it's with the leadership in the department, and we get together and we discuss a lot of different things. So, we're discussing the quality feedback reports that are coming out of there. We're discussing, maybe where those gaps are that we're seeing. Can we bring this back up within, our huddles? But we're also looking at, what is the new tray? If it's something that's totally new to the system, are we, do we have an in-service scheduled? Did we get the count sheet uploaded? Do we have pictures? We're trying to make it a precedent with any new tray added that we're adding those pictures in on the front end. Instead of, the back end where we have a backlog of pictures that are still needed. So we're trying to really get a little bit more structure around those sets that are going in, and following up each week to see, because some of these sets we know can take several months to come in. So really trying to track it as we go along, and then also making sure that it's brought up to the staff so that they not only know what it is, how to clean it, but where is it located? Because sometimes these are trial instruments and they don't have a home. And everybody kind of needs to know where they're located so that if that one surgeon's there, they know where to go find the instrument set without having to, panic or run around with their head cut off looking for this thing. So that's really, we've just kind of added this piece into our meetings. And so I think it's just going to be great for us moving forward to really have that structure around the new things that are being put into the system.
If you're watching this session, or if you're watching on demand after, I would love to know if you want to see a session later on trial instrument tracking and process, because that seems to be a huge gap in the industry in general. Like, what is your policy? What's your practice? What's the best way in these tracking systems to track those? To your point, like, how do we get IFUs ahead of time? How do we build them in the system? It's temporary, et cetera. So if you're tuning in and you want to hear that kind of education, let us know. Or if you don't care, you can let me know that too. So Angela, to this specific responsibility piece, it's clear that Tanya and their team use that kind of weekly meeting to plan and communicate as a leadership team, and then from there communicate out to the rest of the staff what's going on. Do you have a similar process, and or what are the other things that you do and use within the tracking system that might surprise the audience outside of just the competency piece?
With actually the role as the specialist coming in, I find that some of the knowledge I had before of what's happening as new sets coming in and the changes that the OR staff would request, I'm not as involved as I'd like to be. And again, another idea of the weekly meeting, I think that's great. I do communicate a lot, whether it's just in person, try to be included on the emails. I think the fact of new sets coming in and having those in-services, we do have some gaps, I think, with that a little bit, where occasionally just be a set will be sitting there for our, little huddles we do daily, and we will give that communication and discussion, or like you stated, we'll give that communication usually by email for the huddle notes, where the location might be, things like that. But then that'd be really good on one thing, and then you forget it for the next set because something quick comes in and you're just like not thinking anything of it. But being interactive with it, building those count sheets, I am able to do that. I don't do them as much, but there are changes that come up that, just simply renaming something that you've realized the name of it has been so lengthy and way too complicated, and just kind of communicating that with that other person so we do have the consistency in naming the thing the same way each time. Going in and doing those pictures, I have actually just recently had an issue with a set that we rarely see, and it's for spine and it's complicated, and we've reduced the contents, worked with a rep, worked with the OR and the surgeon to try to make that set not as complicated for them and for us as well, and realizing that I still didn't upload the pictures that I took at one point, because in that moment that was what was happening and that was what's important, and then you don't see it for months, and then trying to remember. So absolutely doing that at the front end is so valuable to be able to give that information, because it's going to be forgotten until it's needed later on. And just being able to, I just communicate, and whether, like I said, it's via email in addition to the hands-on in-services, or a video is a great idea as well for training. But I think there are a lot of our hands involved in the process, but just paying attention to those updates and changes and communicating it.
Awesome. Well, so Damon, apart from everything that's been mentioned, the tray updates, the photos, the naming convention, IFUs, if you need to link those, in any way, what other ways do you as an educator, is it expected of you to be using your tracking system today?
Yeah, well, a huge part of my role is making sure we're survey ready and up to regulatory compliance. So I run daily reports on any of our load audits, whether that be our sterilization or high-level disinfection. Just check that on a daily basis. I like to schedule these out, which is really handy. That way, before I even get to work, just on my phone, I get an email before I even log into my instrument tracking system, and I can kind of see where I need to dig into. And I like to share that with my leadership as far as transparency goes. From the educator role, I really love to document all of my in-services, whether they're from myself, from a service lead, from an outside vendor. I can, attach any sort of physical sign-in sheet through my instrument tracking system. So I have proof that, hey, you were there, you signed it, you were trained. I can share that with my staff, competencies. I can run a report each month and say, hey, who is due? And I can share that with my leadership, so they make sure to schedule time out away from the daily grind to spend some time on training or competencies, and making sure we give that individual the time they need. We take a lot of externs at my facility. Every 2 months, we bring in some students for about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the school we bring them with. And while I do work a ton, I'm not there all of the time. And so I always check, their scans by the shift, see what are they working on, how long is it taking them, going through checking just average work time for individual sets. Say, hey, are we getting the most out of our technicians in these certain scenarios, whether they be stuck on a CD rack or a neuro rack, an orthopedic rack? Do they have strengths? Do they have weaknesses? And then I think a huge part of the education role from my instrument tracking system is the workflows. So if I build it on the back end, I can really hold my technician's hand throughout whatever task they're doing, completely customize their workflow, whether they're in decontamination, hey, we need to look for this, disassemble that. If it's like, scope processing or any sort of inspection standpoint as well, we can put pop-ups on the screen, we can have individual checklists, put things in bold, and kind of hold their hand throughout the process. So I don't really need to teach each individual each step of the way. If I'm lucky, I build it the right way and release it, and they won't even notice until they click it and it pops up on the screen and says, oh, this is how we do every single step. And with that, I like to make a short and a long version. Typically start with the longer version and then work our way down to the short once everybody is more comfortable with all the steps.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great feedback. I really like the automated report function, because I think almost every tracking system out there today has some kind of automated reports. I don't know if they all go to your phone, but at the very least, like, they can be set up on a daily, weekly basis. And yeah, that's a great resource for educators. You brought up an important compliance point that I just want to pause for a second and highlight so that everybody knows, because this was a big news back, I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago now. We all remember the Detroit medical issue when they hit the news, and it was like 13 years of quality challenges. And anytime I talk about a specific facility, I always like to remind folks, it could have been us. I think we've all been in facilities that we were like, oh man, if what just happened, if a reporter found out about that, they could make that look very, very bad. Okay, so let's just be honest with ourselves. But in Detroit Medical, what was interesting, because we kind of got a snapshot into the quality and like what the FDA was looking at, what the CMS, Department of Health, what everybody was concerned about there. And one of the things they brought up was something that you said, Damon, of these tracking sheets for the in-services. What they busted them on is they found all of these tracking sheets, or all of these attendance sheets, that were like 70% complete. And they're like, now you've got a record here that says 30% of your staff was never getting in service or consistently. Like it wasn't always the same 30%, but about a third of your staff wasn't at these staff meetings when this was discussed or when this new policy was rolled out. And they, oftentimes it was your PRNs, your third shift, your weekend shifters. Well, that's no surprise because they're not there during the staff meeting. So I want to encourage every educator out there, if you're doing education and if you're tracking, which you should, make sure that you have a mechanism in place to capture all those people that weren't there on the day of the in-service and get to 100% on all of your attendance forms, because you don't want to put yourself or your facility at risk. Okay, end of story for Hank. As we wrap up here, we got about 5 minutes left. I want to give you all the opportunity to kind of look forward with like an innovator's hat on and say, hey, as an educator today, everything that we've talked about that's responsible in your role and kind of touches this tracking system conversation, what do you still find difficult today to do in a tracking system that you hope one day somebody out there, maybe you, can find a solution to fix the challenge or overcome the barrier to make it easier to use your systems? Let's start with Tanya, and then we'll go to Damon, and then I'll give you the last word, Angela.
All right. I think the one thing I would say that I'd love our tracking system to be able to do is to be able to track the machine maintenance in there without having to kind of do a workaround, So we all know that the little drain in the sterilizer should be cleaned daily. But where do you document it?
No.
Where Yeah, where would you document it? And there are ways to do it, but it just doesn't make it easy. So that would be an amazing option, is to have just like a machine maintenance and you can preload. I don't know. It just would be great to have.
Yeah, that's great. Good idea. Okay. Damon, what's your dream innovation?
Well, I'd love if more training modules were integrated into my instrument tracking system. Right now, it's either something I put together with a competency, or I make my technicians sign up with our instrument tracking manufacturer and do their modules online. I wish that was integrated into it with more, clicking through and hands-on. I wish there was more like instrument recognition software. While Angela's taking time to add all the photos, that's super labor intensive, and I feel like there's some way to have maybe like augmented reality or, a way to go hands-free. I think those kind of technological advancements would be huge for sterile processing, save us a ton of time. And then I would love also a universal database. If I type in a unique device identifier, I would hope that somehow it would identify it and tell me what all the others are. Or if I just type in the product number, it can tell me, hey, this is what 1,000 other hospitals have put in, all of the pictures, the IFUs, the inspection standpoint. I think a universal database with the opportunity to edit for particular facility policies or preferences would be wonderful.
Okay. Well, you don't ask for much, do you, Damon? No, just kidding. I'm most excited about your proposal to integrate training into these tracking systems. And I think what you're basically saying is you would like Beyond Clean content to somehow be integrated into these tracking systems. So, for everyone out there that's listening, contact me for more information on that. No. Okay. Angela, wrap us up. What is that innovation that would make your job easier as an educator dealing with these tracking systems?
It's just as big of a request. Virtual reality. Just put a headset on, show me all of the ways I can do it virtually. The process of sterile processing, where you can just initially, first day onboarding training, be able to kind of just show the processes, which a lot of the things we've discussed already essentially is doing that, but in real life. So not a huge idea plan, but we're getting there. We have a lot of awesome technology, and just even this discussion, I think having, further discussions amongst everyone and be able to have ideas out there. I've gained a lot from this conversation. So
I know I was kind of kidding with Damon, but all of these ideas are within reach. That's what's great about every single one of this is it's not that the technology is not there. It's not that folks are already thinking and working on it. It just hasn't happened yet and been implemented yet. So great ideas, great conversation panel. Thank you all for giving your time today at this conference to educate the other educators and technicians and leaders out there. And I want to let everyone know who's tuning in, all of these folks are able and willing to answer any questions that you have after the panel, or just kind of brainstorm around other solutions that were brought up in today's panel. So don't be shy. Reach out and connect with them on LinkedIn. And with that, we'll turn it back over to our conference host.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. What a great discussion. And, great discussions like that fill the whole time during a conference session are wonderful. But I know so many of you sent in some really, really great questions. So please know that the questions that you submitted will be distributed to the panel so that they can address those via email directly. So I want to make sure that they get answered. What a unique discussion. Thanks for tuning in. We have one session left for this global instrument tracking conference. And so those of you who have stuck with us all day long, cheers to you. Thanks for your dedication. For those of you who are going to be tuning in on demand, we're excited that you'll be learning via that method. As a reminder, there is a 15-minute break, but I do want to remind you of a couple things. Number one, if you're still wondering how to access your CE certificate, there is an instruction document in the resources tool on the right-hand side of your page. So go ahead and download that. It gives you all the instructions for accessing the CE certificate for this event, and then also for the bonus content. The bonus content is awesome supplemental education that you can get additional CEs for. Like I said, we have one more event for the day, 15-minute break prior to that. Grab some water, grab a snack, and let's end this conference on the highest note yet. It seems like it's hard to do because it's been a pretty awesome day so far, but I know you're going to enjoy this next presentation as a presenter on behalf of our sponsor, Censis Technologies. So stay tuned. One more session today. We're so happy you're here. We'll talk soon.